The issue, border security. The wedge, the partial government shutdown. The collateral damage, federal employees who didn't get a paycheck yesterday. Yet they refuse to negotiate, sit for serious talks, or work for the safety and security of the American people. Their mantra? There is no crisis at our open, porous borders. Their goal? Destroy Donald Trump. And yesterday, reports are an even larger caravan is staging in Honduras, about to cause an even greater burden on our Border Patrol and the system at large. The president has shown he is capable of negotiating. He has gone from a concrete wall to a steel slat barrier, willing to go with any barrier, any physical barrier that you cannot climb over, crawl under, rappel, or shoot yourself out of a cannon over. He's made concessions from $25 billion to $5 billion, from a concrete barrier to a steel one, promising more personnel, detention beds, using technology and electronics to buttress the security, and money to address the humanitarian needs. In spite of his negotiating, the Democrats refuse to budge. But curiously, there are some Democrats peeling away from the rigid, non-negotiable stance of Nancy Pelosi.
Well, I can tell you we've had fencing in the past. I'm sure we will in the future.
There are places where wall makes sense, but there are a lot of places where it doesn't.
Some fencing, you're saying, is useful.
Some fencing is useless, some barriers are useful.
If we have a partial wall, if we have fencing, if we have technology used to keep our border safe, all of that is fine.
Well, you have to see what you're talking about here. Does it contribute in a smart way to our security? Certain physical barriers can make sense along the border, and in a lot of places, you already have that.
I have a solution. There is no question that President Trump has the authority to declare a national emergency. The controlling case is Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer, 343 U.S. 579. The critical operational issue is that only money already authorized and appropriated by Congress can be spent. The only serious source of funds are in the military construction bill. This week, there was some debate whether that money would come from a line item of $13.1 billion covering housing in Afghanistan and Iraq, or a $13.9 billion line for disaster relief. Now, clearly, the $13.1 billion should be the line used, since I doubt we need to build homes in Afghanistan and Iraq.
The partial government shutdown could become the longest in U.S. history tomorrow as it begins its fourth week. Federal workers who are not being paid have begun holding protests across the country.
With Democrats controlling the House, a funding deal compromise doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon. Paula Reed has more.
We don't have a barrier. If we don't have a steel or concrete barrier, we're all wasting a lot of time.
As hundreds of thousands of federal workers prepare to miss their first paycheck today, President Trump is at war over his wall.
Everybody wants us to win this battle. It's common sense. Death is pouring through.
Deliberately surrounded by helicopters and contraband seized by border agents, the president continued to portray the nation as under siege by gangs, drugs, and human traffickers.
They need a barrier. They need a wall.
But federal workers need to put food on the table.
We need our paychecks.
Across the country, increasingly desperate federal workers stage protests against the shutdown.
Hey, hey, oh, oh, the shutdown has got to go.
Even the president's most ardent supporters see no end in sight for the standoff.
I have never been more depressed about moving forward than right now. I just don't see a pathway forward.
A key issue for Republicans, the president's mixed messages on who pays for the wall. He told this to John Dickerson 3 months after taking office.
How much are those going to pay?
100%, whole thing?
100%. They're going to be happy with it. They'll be very happy to pay.
Yesterday, the president took a different approach.
Obviously, they're not going to write a check, but they are paying for the wall indirectly
many, many times over by the really great trade deal we just made.
If Democrats won't give him taxpayer money for the wall, the president says he will exercise his power to declare a national emergency.
I would say it would be very surprising to me that I would not declare a national emergency.
Jesse Weber is an attorney and host for the Law and Crime Network, and he joins us now. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
All right, Congress enacted the National Emergencies Act in 1976, but it didn't really define what a national emergency is. What is the president's legal authority under this act, and what is this national emergency?
You took the words right out of my mouth. It's never clear what a national emergency is, but that act authorizes the president to declare a national emergency. But it's not so simple. He can authorize it, but it places restrictions. He has to be very specific which powers from which statutes give him the authority, and where is he getting the money from? It's not like you just declare a national emergency and then he takes over. So there are several ways that he could do that. One statute gives the Secretary of Defense authorization to build military construction projects for the armed forces. Another one for national security. In fact, one gives the Secretary of Defense authority to build fences and roads to prevent drug smuggling. And you can imagine, thinking about the influx of people, that's something that you might imagine the president doing. Also, if you look at the Immigration Act, that gives the president authority to declare a national emergency if there are so many people coming in that the immigration laws can't keep up. Now, you might be saying, wow, look, these are so many justifications. The bigger question is, can he get to $5 billion? Because even if he can provide justification under one of those statutes, there's only a certain amount of money allocated for each one.
We do start this hour with breaking news as we show you live pictures from central Paris, where there's been a large explosion in the center of the city. All right, straight to our France correspondent, Charlotte Dubinsky, now joining us live from the French capital. Charlotte, what do we know so far about this explosion?
Well, we know that at around 9 a.m. local time here in Paris, a huge explosion was heard at a bakery in the city of Boulangerie. That explosion was massive, waking people up in their beds, rocking the buildings nearby, and started a fire. Now, it's understood that it's been treated as a suspected gas leak at the moment, and there are more than 20 people that we know about being injured. I just want to give you a sense of the scene here, Rory. Look around. Pretty much everywhere we look, you're going to see the emergency crews. This is the firemen, the police service, medics here. We understand from the Interior Minister of France, Christopher Castaner, that there are at least 200 firefighters taking part in what is now a rescue operation to discover if there is anybody trapped in the building above that bakery and in the buildings around, partly which were destroyed as a result of that explosion. We've also seen sniffer dogs out here on the streets, often used, of course, in situations like this to see if they can find anybody trapped. We've been speaking to people on the street, people who live here, tourists who are here on holiday, who were woken up by that blast this morning.
We were just woken up, the building started to shake, heard some smashing glass. Everyone looked out their windows and a lot of window panes had been smashed. About 15 minutes later, there were policemen in the courtyard just saying, been an explosion, need to evacuate everybody out. And that's what happened to us.
How are you feeling right now?
Yeah, a bit shaken. Not really expected on a family holiday to be evacuated
second day
on the
in
second
Paris.
day in Paris.
Well, over the last hour since we've been at the scene, we've seen people who've been brought out from the streets behind us, some wearing the metal foil, which is the foil sheets which are used to try and keep people warm who've been in shock. We also have some details about the injured that we know of so far. More than 20 individuals, including 2, we're told, who are in very serious conditions, 7 who are fairly injured, and 11 who have just received light injuries. But many people, of course, shocked here today that this is happening. The Mayor of Paris has been on the scene to see what the response has been from the emergency crews. And we've also heard from the Interior Minister giving his thoughts and prayers to anybody who has been caught up on this explosion. So far, what we know, more than 20 people have been injured in a suspected gas explosion which has rocked this part of Paris. A heavy tourist area. Many people now out on the streets just trying to work out exactly what will happen next. Many have been told they needed to get out of the buildings because there could have been a second explosion. Many people here on holiday or live here are on the streets not knowing when they'll be able to enter their apartments, and that's because right now the priority is to make sure that the area is secure and that anybody else who is in those buildings or caught up in that explosion or in the damage of that explosion is found as soon as possible.
Charlotte, talk to us a bit more about the Gilets Jaunes, the Yellow Vest protest movement. I understand now we're entering our 9th weekend for the continuation of these demonstrations and protests. I also understand the French leader, Emmanuel Macron, is now attempting to appease the public further by initiating a 3-month national debate. What does that mean? What is he initiating?
Well, yes, that's the other big story here in France today, and that is the fact that it is Act 9 of the Gilets Jaunes, the 9th weekend of protests that are taking place not just here in Paris but across France. These protests which started back on November 17th, which were about a rise in fuel tax, which was due to take place in January. That's since been scrapped. And as you mentioned there, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, offered a number of concessions to the protesters. One of the concessions he talked about when he gave his big speech back in December was the idea of having a national debate. This debate, which will begin on Tuesday of next week, is going to take 3 months. There are going to be 4 themes in that debate, looking at things such as issues with democracy, how to improve democracy in France, looking at how to improve services in rural areas. And the idea is that these debates will be held at town halls across France, will allow people to come in and to express their concerns and also to suggest ideas how France can improve the lives of the people here. Because that's one of the main issues of this Gilets Jaunes movement, is people saying that the cost of living in France is just too high.
Reculez, dégagez!
With every US intervention, the question of when, why, and if at all to withdraw its forces has sooner or later taken center stage and stirred both debate and controversy. Syria is the latest example, and how much confusion this discussion has already caused. First problem to solve is how the withdrawal will look. It still remains a mystery, not only to the world, but seemingly also to US officials themselves.
They're all coming back, and they're coming back now.
They said again recently, could we have more time? I said, nope, you can't have any more time.
We're going to be removing our troops I never said we're doing it that quickly.
I never said fast or slow.
What's your timetable? When do you want troops to be out?
Somebody said 4 months.
You just stated on the timetable for withdrawing troops. Do you think it's?
I think it's just over a period of time, but we're withdrawing.
Is it mission accomplished? As with George Bush's Iraq War speech, things don't look that clear and simple. And the biggest problem of all, just how will the US balance the interests of its permanent and temporary allies in the region?
We're going to be discussing the president's decision to withdraw, but to do so from northeast Syria in a way that makes sure that the defense of Israel and our other friends in the region is absolutely assured.
Those other allies are the Kurds. The US says they won't leave until they're safe. And this is a red line for Turkey, a long-standing NATO ally. Any Kurd-linked conditions or caveats are simply unacceptable for Ankara.
If the withdrawal is put off with ridiculous excuses, like the Turks are massacring Kurds, which does not reflect the reality, we will implement this decision.
And we haven't even spoken about containing Iran. Also, does the defeat of ISIS automatically equal a US exit? President Trump certainly seemed to think so.
We have won against ISIS. We've beaten them, and we've beaten them badly.
But others, like Mike Pompeo or John Bolton, still talk of the continuing battle against Islamic State. US forces continue airstrikes in Syria, which show no sign of abating. Which brings me to this next point. Despite the concerns of top officials, the Pentagon is already taking a more relaxed attitude to their current strike reports.
The continued degradation of ISIS leads to decreased kinetic activities against the terrorist organization. Our intent is to reduce the number of reports while maintaining transparency.
Reports will decrease from weekly to twice a month. And releases will no longer indicate a specific time, location, or even target for such strikes.
Mexico is facing major fuel shortages as the country's new president tackles oil theft. Gas stations across the country are running out of fuel, and some public transportation has been halted.
This comes as Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, cracks down on cartels and gangs stealing oil from pipelines. It is just one of the many challenges facing the new leader. For more on this, let's bring in CBSN contributor Willis Sparks. He writes for Signal. That's a newsletter produced by G0 Media. Good to see you, Willis.
Good to see you.
So in today's newsletter, you highlight 3 rookie mistakes that President Obrador has already made. The gas shortage crisis is one of them. What are some of the others?
Well, the gas shortage thing is interesting just because it's an attempt to solve a real problem, but they apparently just shut the gasoline out of the pipeline without knowing that they didn't have enough gasoline in reserve to avoid a shortage that may go on for weeks. So it's a huge unforced error by a guy who promised a radical transformation of the country. A couple of other mistakes. He also, the party has proposed a bill that would limit salaries and benefits for public sector workers to the reduced salary and benefits of the president. So in other words, it's a big salary and benefit cut for a lot of people who work for the government. This is a president who has a very government-centric approach to all kinds of problem solving, and we're already seeing early evidence that people are just quitting or retiring, and they're going somewhere else. So you're kind of hollowing out the tool that you had been planning to use to accomplish the rest of your agenda. The other issue has to do with criminal gangs. You know, you were talking about them in Puerto Rico a moment ago. Obviously, it's a huge story in Mexico as well. Reforma, a newspaper in Mexico City, put out a statistic on Wednesday that got a lot of attention because they said that homicides committed by criminal gangs jumped 65% in a month, from the last month of the past president to the first month of the new president. López Obrador's response was to say, well, these statistics are misleading because why are you only talking about homicides committed by criminal gangs? You should be reporting on all homicides. There's a big consumer technology conference in Vegas called CES. And one of the things that we actually saw a video of this, is a robot that is doing physical exercise called parkour, which is based on military obstacle course training. So you look at this clip and you think, I've seen this movie before and it does not end well.
No, it's creepy.
But the deeper question here is...
Can he travel back in time?
This is a subject that starts with drones, but it raises the very serious issue, which is if robots are going to do our fighting in the future, war may be treated a lot differently. One of the things that prevents a lot of wars is that older people don't like it when their sons and daughters are placed in harm's way, and young people don't like getting shot at. So if you have drones and robots doing all the fighting for you, does that lower our inhibitions about war and make war more likely? There are a lot of ethical questions raised by this very alarming little piece of video.
They always just look just a little creepy.
Yeah, and if it starts to talk and it says, "Come with me if you want to live," run.
SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket is getting ready to launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The rocket will attempt a landing on an offshore drone ship about 7 minutes after liftoff.
4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Liftoff of Falcon 9.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
Stage 1 props nominal.
We're throttling down now in preparation for the period of maximum dynamic pressure.
Vehicle supersonic.
Garcia on countdown 1, first motion time 15:31:33.492 UTC.
Calling out the time there of liftoff over the net.
Acquisition of signal.
We're through the period of maximum dynamic pressure.
Maximum aerodynamic pressure.
Merlin engines continuing to perform at 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Falcon 9 heading out into the upper atmosphere. Nice view from the first stage camera looking aft. We're headed south from Vandenberg Air Force Base, Space Launch Complex 4 East.
Head back engine chill. Stage separation confirmed. Head back ignition. Stage 1 has entered its flip.
So we've had successful shutdown of the first stage. It's separated. It's doing the flip to reorient, and it's lit its 3 engines to begin slowing it down to come to the drone ship. We're coming up 4 minutes into flight. In about a minute and a half, the first stage will initiate a quick re-entry burn to again slow the rocket down as it re-enters Earth's atmosphere. A minute later, we'll perform the final burn, the landing burn, which will decelerate the vehicle to a gentle landing atop our drone ship. Getting excellent views as the sun has risen recently over the west coast here in the United States.
Stage 1 entry burn has started.
Call out the entry burn on stage 1 has started. 3 engines up and running.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And the entry burn shut down, called out over the countdown net, as you heard.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Everything continuing to look good. First stage entry burn has ended. We're less than a minute until the third and final landing burn, followed by touchdown on the drone ship. And you can see the first stage descending back down through the atmosphere as it's coming up on the cloud deck. Now, as a reminder, we may lose live video coverage on the drone ship as the engine exhaust degrades the radio frequency signal. Now, if that happens, we'll share status updates on the first stage as they become available.
Drone ship AOS.
Drone ship AOS means the drone ship has acquired the signal.
Landing burn has started.
Center engine has lit. We're slowing ourselves down, preparing to find the drone ship right underneath us. You've got the camera view from the drone ship now. Waiting to see the first stage come into view. And we're getting the signal dropout, which is not unusual.
Falcon 9 has landed. Landing operators moving to 11.1
There you go. We heard the call out from recovery. Falcon 9 has landed. We hope to get a shot of it on the deck of the drone ship.
Everything went exactly according to plan. That's the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket carrying some communication satellites well on its way. But part of the reason they were applauding is because of the picture that you see right on your right-hand side, the sort of first section of the rocket. The hope is always that it will land on a drone ship.